module called Introduction to Coaching and Mentoring that was developed earlier this year by the Academy with a number of partners from within and outside the sector. We've taken the feedback from those people who've already completed this module, and we'll use the webinar to really respond to the questions and requests for further insights and practical tips and hints that we received as part of that feedback. We hope that this will help to further enhance your coaching and mentoring practice. So to help me today are three panelists, and I'd just like to spend a moment just introducing them to you now. So my first colleague here with us today is Esther de Vreede, and Esther is an independent coach for the Leadership Development Programme under the CHS Alliance. She's previously also worked as a freelance advisor, a coach and a trainer, and has over 20 years experience in international development and humanitarian response, most of which has been in East, Southern and the Horn of Africa. We're also joined by Ezekiel Lein. Ezekiel is the head of analysis and communications unit at UN OCHA and is in the occupied Palestinian territory at the moment. And within OCHA, Ezekiel has also been a coaching champion with very much direct experience in using different coaching models within and between offices to support colleagues in their work. And before OCHA, Ezekiel's background is in human rights research. And finally, our third panelist today is Shola Awolesi. And Shola is a learning and development consultant with a focus on leadership and management development, who's worked for many years at Save the Children, running their flagship global leadership development program and managing a network of coaches that support that. And in this role, she also worked with me and other colleagues at the Academy and with other partners in the development of that online module that I mentioned earlier. So that's just a little bit about us. So it would be really nice just before we start to really gauge the level of experience we have amongst you all joining us here today. So I'm just going to ask Gem to pop up another poll really. What experience do you have of coaching or mentoring yourselves? And if you just take 30 seconds to give us an indication, that would be great. So we've got a number of you then with some experience, a few of you who may be coming quite fresh to coaching and mentoring, and then some of you who have maybe done a lot of coaching and mentoring. That's fantastic. So as Jen mentioned, do encourage you to use the chat function to maybe share some experience or insights as we go forward. But without further ado then, I'd like to kick off with the first question that we received asking for further insight, which is, what is the difference between coaching and mentoring? And I'm going to pass to Shola to begin that discussion. Thanks, Shola.
The difference between coaching and mentoring, this is a question that comes up a lot when we run training courses. For me, the core difference is that with coaching, the individual has clarity. With coaching, the individual has an understanding of what the objectives are, and what they're looking to do is work with the coach. They've got some understanding of the issue, but what they're looking to do is work with the coach to get greater clarity. So in a sense, the coachee has the answer within them, and the role of the coach within that is to help them to unlock their answers. In terms of mentoring, you're looking at where the individual doesn't really have the experience in that area or doesn't have the knowledge, and they're looking to the mentor to provide guidance, direction and support. So in a sense, with coaching, it's less directive. It's really looking at how the coach can help the coachee to come up with their own solutions. And with mentoring, it's about an individual, usually more experienced in that area, providing support, guidance and advice to the individual. So I'd say that's one of the core differences. I think another thing to bear in mind is, in a sense, the duration. So with mentoring tends to be something that goes on for a much longer period of time. So if I think about my own experiences, I've had mentors that have worked with me over a period of 5 years and longer, thinking about career opportunity, career progression, what are the things I want to do, whereby coaching is more time bound. It typically is up to 12 months, sometimes a little bit more, up to 18 months, but really we wouldn't really advise much more than that so that we don't create dependency. I think that's another key difference between coaching and mentoring.
Wonderful, thanks, Shola. Maybe I can just ask Esther, do you have anything that you'd wish to add to that in terms of what is the difference between coaching and mentoring from your own experiences?
Thanks, Gabby. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think Shola addressed it already, and I think the time issue, the range of time you have for coaching or mentoring is a critical one, whereas coaching can be very much shorter time frame and limited. In the work I've done I've always seen also with the coachees kind of confusion between expecting more of a mentor rather than a coach, and coming from the sector, not just being a coach, but also being a sector expert, so to speak. I think that's just one of the pitfalls maybe as a coach to watch, that you're not becoming a mentor as such, and where possible you have a longer term relationship, you can build on that, but the coaching has a different role, and I've spent quite a bit of time with the coachees just to explore that, and what is it that you want from coaching, or is it a mentor that you're looking for, and can somebody else maybe take that place? So it depends a bit on the question that people have. I think both have a benefit. But the coaching I've done for the CHS Alliance was always just 3 or 4 sessions, and then you really need to focus on the coaching bit, and it doesn't allow for a lot of mentorship.
Thank you, Esther. And I think my takeaway from that really is just thinking about, really being clear, what is it that the individual requires? Is it a coach? Is it a mentor? So that you can be clear that you can provide whatever they need, and see whether you're best fit to provide what they need. That's fantastic. So moving forward then, the next question was, when should you use coaching or mentoring? And who would benefit most from each approach? And I know that you started to answer that question, but perhaps I could bring in Ezekiel now, maybe to take that forward based on your own experiences, Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabby. First of all, unlike Esther and Shola, I'm not a professional coach. I have just taken 1 or 2 trainings and have tried to use that in my role as a manager with the team that I am responsible for in OPT. So it's to share some of the experience that I have gathered. I think that both approaches, they have like skills and techniques to offer that are good for life and for handling any relationship, such as active listening, asking thought-provoking questions, etc. However, when it comes to more structure, the use of the tool, it is important to have some criteria to know when it makes sense to use this tool. And what it has been useful for me in managing people, it's the looking at the situations and the specific individuals along 2 key parameters. That one, it's the competence, and the other, it's the motivation. So it ends up, if you put them in a kind of a matrix, into 4 cases. I think that the easiest one and the most comfortable, I wish everybody will be there, it's when you have a person that it's high in competence and high in motivation. I think that in that case, I usually don't use neither coaching nor mentoring. I just delegate, and I trust that the person will deliver. I know that the person can deliver. When we have the opposite case with a person that it's low in motivation and low in competence, you have no choice but to go for a directive approach. And I think something that it's more resemblant to mentoring. And then you have the other 2 cases that I think that they are the most interesting, that you have someone with high competence by low motivation. Usually I meet these people with a long time doing the same thing in the same environment, that they are a bit burn out, or when you have the other case with someone that it's with very high motivation but very little knowledge and competence, usually new people that have just joined. And I think that in both of these situations, coaching could be useful. You have something very strong that you can build on, and to help that person to find its way. And that's where I try to use coaching. I am not speaking about providing a series of sessions or whatever, but to deal with specific challenges, with specific tasks, to go through often very short conversations, that it could be as short as half an hour in the coaching mode, could be very useful.
Ezekiel, thank you so much for those insights. Shola, Esther, can I ask either one of you if you'd like to build on that?
Ezekiel has spoken a lot about when to use one rather than the other. I think a point that Esther made earlier as well was for me about readiness and education as well. There's something about both, whether it's a coachee or a mentee, being really clear about what engagement they're going into. So if it's coaching that they're going into, they've got a clear understanding of the purpose of it, why they're using that, and how long it's going to last. And also the same thing with mentoring. And Ezekiel, you mentioned it as well. The role of a manager, we wear different hats, and it's about how we identify both for ourselves, but also for the individual that we're working with. When we're using coaching, we're clear of that. When we're using mentoring, we're clear of that, or any of the other support roles that a manager would use.
Thank you, Shola. And Esther, is there anything else you'd like to add to that before we move on?
Thanks, Gabby. I think most has been said, and I think both can be beneficial. It very much depends on the person, the context, and what they need at a time. I think if I look back at some of the coachees I've worked with, some of them were looking more into career development, next steps, and going forward in that, which I think is more of a mentoring guidance that they're looking for. Whereas other people, particularly in the humanitarian sector, with time pressure, a lot happening, it's all quick now it's more about how do I set priorities, and just having kind of almost like quick solutions that you can really fix in a 1 hour coaching sessions, get them back on track so they can move on with the work they need to do on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Esther. And actually, if I can just keep you on there, because one of the things that it's quite interesting is we've talked about, what is the difference and when you should be coaching and mentoring, but also when should you not coach or mentor? And maybe Esther, I can come to you first as you're there.
Sure, thanks, Gabby. Yeah, I think we all need to be aware that coaches are not counselors, and particularly in the humanitarian sector, people do or can experience kind of traumatic events, be under a lot of pressure. So when there's certain kind of mental health issues or other behavioral aspects, it can be kind of PTSD. I mean, I've suffered it myself, and if you know the symptoms, it's good to be aware of it when people working in the sector, because they might need counseling more than a coach can offer. And I think those are boundaries that you need to be very careful to not cross, because I mean, we've not been trained. I've not been trained as such. Other coaches might have that kind of psychosocial training as well, but that's, I think, where you need to be very clear of your boundaries, and depending on the organization they work for, what are the duty of care responsibilities that are that should be well embedded within that organization, or getting external counseling offered if that's what they need.
Wonderful, thank you, Esther. So maybe a question for all of you who are on the webinar with us today. Do you think coaching and mentoring can make a difference and have an impact? And perhaps it would be really good if you could use the chat box on your screen just to maybe share your views and your experience of that. So let me just repeat the question. Do you think that coaching and mentoring can make an impact and make a difference. So just take a few moments and maybe just, it'd be good to hear some of your thoughts. And perhaps while you're doing that, why don't I just go to Shola, perhaps, and maybe you can start sharing some of your thoughts around that. So do you think that coaching and mentoring, Shola, can make a difference and make an impact? And just while we wait for colleagues to type in on chat.
Yes, I definitely think that coaching and mentoring makes an impact in terms of what it can achieve. In my experience of working at Save the Children, I managed a network of coaches and worked to build a coaching culture within Save the Children, also looking at mentoring as well. And I'd say that the impact of coaching happenings, I'd say possibly on 3 different levels. So to the individual, to a team, and to an organization as a whole. I think on the individual level, there's something about having been coached, just being able to have clarity in terms of purpose and what one is wanting to achieve. Increased confidence is another thing that in my experience was reported as, from people who had received coaching. I think in terms of relationships as well, so looking at teams and in pairs as well, there definitely was seems to improve in the working relationships because people are having better conversations, whether it's through coaching or mentoring. It enabled issues that maybe were bubbling under the surface to come forward. And there's also the space for team coaching as well within all of that. I think on an organizational level, it's really important because if we look at coaching and the definition of coaching, it's about unlocking potential. And so when an organization invests in that, in coaching or a coaching approach, there is the opportunity to unlock potential. And if we're doing that, you can only have greater impact. I think the final thing I'll say is that there are organizations out there that talk about how coaching has had an impact on their bottom line, how coaching has had an impact on their actual business or, in terms of their objectives. So yes, there is definitely a lot of work to be done in terms of coaching, but we're making, I think as a profession, we're making really good progress into seeing the value of it and the impact that it can have.
Thanks, Shola. Ezekiel, maybe I can come to you and just thinking about your experiences and where you've seen it make a difference.
Yeah, I would say that for me, the mentoring has been in the past. I mean, the default way of dealing with the people that I am managing. And obviously, when you share your experience, your expertise, your guidance to someone, you can have an opportunity for improving and to making a difference in the performance and in the results of that person. However, when I became exposed to coaching, I discover an added value that it's there, that it's critical, and that one, it's ownership. When you have a process that where you allow as Shola said, the coachee to unlock whatever knows and make those resources available, the effectiveness of the whatever course of action that it's chosen can be much higher, even though if in theory the solution that was picked, it may not be the most effective. When you have something that it comes from inside, that you own, that it's truly yours, I think that at the bottom line, it will be a net gain in terms of effectiveness. Maybe one additional comment, that it's more about the environment that we work, the humanitarian, the use of coaching in humanitarian context. I am used to the place where I work, and I have also helped people working in similar contexts that are protracted conflicts or situations where the caseloads and the situations that you deal are pretty stable most of the time, and this is an environment that allows the pause that it's required in order to have a conversation to go through an inquiry. I have also the experience, fortunately short ones, of working on a peak sudden emergency that were the worst wars in Gaza. And I didn't know coaching at that time, but my feeling is that it's less useful, less appropriate when you don't have that the luxury of that pause to try to go into something, into that kind of conversation. You have pressure to deliver, and you can also less afford making mistakes, by choosing the wrong course of actions, etc. So maybe I think the coaching is something that you need to reserve for times that you can afford that in terms of calm and space.
Ezekiel, thank you. And just looking at the chat, thank you so much, everybody. We've got a lot of comments here from you. Noel Awiti saying, I believe if you get the right fit between coach and coachee and mentor and mentee, this can be very useful and make an impact on both individuals. And I think that's also something to consider, isn't it? It's not always one-way traffic. It could be, there can be benefits, you as a mentor or you as a coach in terms of that relationship, and you can probably get something out of that for yourselves as well in your own development and insights, which is interesting. So thank you, Noel, for that. And Javier says, absolutely, when used for the right case, as was just mentioned, the challenge is to combine these interventions with the demands of humanitarian and emergency work. And I think that's to your point just now, Ezekiel, it's finding that space, that calm in quite busy and hectic schedules to have a really good structured conversation where you can be listening, where you can be asking the right questions, and where you can be offering feedback very succinctly in those moments. So that's fantastic. So what we'll be doing as well, just to say, is we're going to be capturing all the chat and making sure that we make a record of this and use this as a resource moving forward, so that you can all see and share from others' experience. So moving on then, if I may. The next question was a quite specific one, actually, that came through from the feedback, which was, does coaching and how do we build trust and rapport early on with your coach and mentee? So Shola, how do you build trust and rapport early on with your coach and mentee?
I think, thank you, Gabby. I think that's a really good question. Trust is a really important one in terms of coaching. And I think from the point where you have that initial contact, you start to get a sense of each other. The contracting is, before the contracting, there's usually some kind of a chemistry meeting to get a sense of, actually, is this the right fit? And also, if it's in terms of a manager relationship, there's a conversation to be had about, is the manager the person? You can use a coaching approach with your direct reports or with your colleagues, but in terms of a specific coaching engagement, is the manager the right person to be coaching that individual, or do you want to get somebody independent? So within all of that, so the chemistry meeting is really important. The contracting is really important as well, to be able to introduce each other to each other so you get a sense of who you are. I think being really clear about what are the expectations that you have of each other, and actually, are you the right person to be coaching this individual? I think those are really key things. Once it gets down to the relationship coaching engagement itself, there's the importance of assuring confidentiality. I think that's a really key thing within a coaching relationship. And just also within being able to work within your boundaries. I think that was something that Esther mentioned earlier, working within the area of your competence. So being really clear that I'm, as a coach, this is my area of focus or specialism. So whether it's leadership, whether it's career development, whether it's personal development, and also being really clear about what you can't do as a coach. So just that contracting, the chemistry meeting, the contracting are really important in terms of setting the relationship going. And then I think in terms of coaching itself, the coaching practice, it's those core skills. A coach that is, as we hope with all coaches, able to listen well, ask good questions, be non-directive. Those are some of the really important skills of the coach that helps to build that rapport. Also doing what you say. So if you've got a meeting set up for 10 o'clock, being there on time. If there's a need to cancel, which as a coach you try not to, being very clear about, you know, giving enough notice, and all of that happens within the contracting. So those early stages within the coaching relationship are really important to build trust and to build rapport.
Thanks, Shola. That's invaluable advice. Thank you. The next question that came through was, how do you create the right environment to coach or mentor? And Esther, I'm going to come to you on that one, if I may.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, I think Shola has already kind of indicated kind of what kind of framework and how you build that trust. But I think it's also important when you talk about confidentiality that people have privacy and are able to speak. So when doing kind of the distance kind of Skype online coaching, to allow people to make sure that they have a safe environment. If need to be, it can be in the evening hours when they're at home, if they're not free to speak in the office, or if it's a very densely populated office where they cannot speak and address private issues. It is thinking about technology, internet connections. People are at different places. Access can be a real issue. So it's finding the right time zone, time of day, flexibility, and then also agree on the time frame. We have 1 hour. What can we do in 1 hour? Where can we start? And then keeping an eye on that as well, so that you gradually kind of wind up and be very concrete about what have we done, what action points, where do we go from here. But I think, yeah, it's around privacy, it's around thinking about technology and allowing the other person to be in a space where they are free to speak. And that comes back to the confidentiality issue that Shola also raised.
Great, thanks, Esther. Okay, it's poll time, everybody. And I have a poll for you. So I'd like you to think about whether this is true or false. So you can have more impact if you coach or mentor someone face-to-face rather than remotely, such as via Skype. Would you say that was true, or would you say that was false? Your 30 seconds starts now. Okay, so we have majority of you think that you can have more impact if you coach or mentor someone face to face, although it's quite close between the two. So perhaps let's unpack this question a little bit more. Maybe I can go straight to you, Ezekiel. Is it better to coach or mentor someone face to face or at a distance in your experience?
Well, obviously the face-to-face interaction has some advantages, some resources that you don't have or that are less effective in a distance coaching. I mean, you can make more, take more from the body language, from the use intonation more effectively. You can also, you will avoid, I mean, technical disruptions that you may have when you are using Skype. However, I mean, I had the chance to do distance coaching once, I mean, over a series of sessions with a colleague overseas in Colombia, and another one during an training about coaching that I did very recently, and I discovered some of the advantages of distance coaching in the sense of not only physically distance, but also when you are distant from the issue that it's being discussed and from the people that are being dealt by in the conversation. I call it that the power of ignorance. I mean, when you don't know, when you don't have a stake in the issue that it's being discussed, and you don't have a strong opinion about the people, the different stakeholders, then your questioning process, it's more genuine, it's more promising in terms of what it can yield. It's very difficult, even if you are conscious about that. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it's difficult not to be biased by your opinions about how to do things. So we can try to avoid, guiding questions, etc. But it's always there. I mean, when you know how to do certain things and someone wants to be coached. So when you have that distance that you truly don't know about the subject matter, it gives you an advantage. I mean, I don't want to contradict what Shola said, that your expertise, it's also important and it can help, but also ignorance can help, that it's a bit counter-intuitive. And maybe to finish with that, in that training that I took also through a webinar, we were asked to do coaching for 20 minutes with another person in another office. And I was given a colleague from OCHA that was doing something that until the moment, I am not sure I understood. And I felt a bit intimidated at the beginning, like I will need to spend the entire 20 minutes just to get a sense of what she's doing. But then I recover and I say, it's not important to have a great understanding of the subject matter. I will try to concentrate on the challenge that she's posing. And it was about the process of the work that she was doing. And we were able to come with two potential step forwards, I mean, to address the situation without understanding exactly the topic, I mean, of the content of the work. And I felt in that situation that it was an advantage, because I didn't interfere with whatever she thought about the issue on how to do things, but just to extract possible ways to address that challenge.
Ezekiel, thank you. Esther, can I come to you, just in your experience? Is anything that you wish to add to that?
Thanks. Yeah, and also looking at some of the questions people are posing as to really applying it in humanitarian work. I do have a preference for face-to-face meetings because of all the elements that Ezekiel mentioned, where you can read more into the non-verbal language that people speak. But doing it online or through distance does allow you to reach out to people that work in remote places, in difficult to access countries where other coaches might not necessarily be available. So you have a much broader reach. And personally, when I was still based in East Africa and Nairobi, I did coach people in Nairobi, but also those in Somalia, but also those in Pakistan and Myanmar and other places. And you can reach out to those people through online means. And I think that's the benefit of it.
Esther, thank you. And actually just looking at some of the questions that people pose, and thank you, Stephen. We've got Stephen Collins here who's asked a question which I think leads very nicely into what you were saying. Is the most effective formula not one that combines face-to-face coaching with remote sessions? The latter offers mobility and speed of connection, while the face-to-face meetings are definitely more profound because of the logistics and things that you were saying. So any thoughts around that, Esther?
Well, I think he's very right. I mean, within the humanitarian sector, we need to work with the limitations that we have. And what I said, where possible, I like to have face-to-face interaction because it allows for a more personal touch to it. But on the other hand, I also did coach, when I moved back to the Netherlands, I did coach this lady in northern Kenya who then moved to Somaliland. And we had 3 online sessions and we built up a rapport, and I managed to help her and guide her through a process where she was new in the sector and really wanted to further develop and approach what she could do. And it was very effective in what we did. So it's a combination of things. It's technology, it's personality, and just literally the accessibility. Are you there or are you in the neighborhood or not? If it is possible to have it face to face, do so. But otherwise, it shouldn't stop you from coaching or being coached, because there's many other ways we can do it and still be effective.
Wonderful, thank you. And just one of the final questions that we had actually coming through from previous feedback was, how do I build in time to practice to be the best coach or mentor that I can be? And perhaps, Esther, just while you're still on with us, perhaps I could come to you in the first instance and then other colleagues could jump in as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I did some initial training. I don't think as a coach, I mean, there are accredited coaches, some of the people raised as well, but I now also am a coach in the organization where I work. We do coaching kind of leadership, but a manager is not necessarily able to coach. So it does require some form of training. And I think I haven't done a lot of practice as in trying things out, but it's being well prepared. It is using kind of tools, checklists, guiding questions, having that ready going into your session. And in the past and in my current job, we use, for example, the GROW model. And for each step in that process, have a set of guiding questions that you can refer back to if you feel the conversation gets stuck. And I think you develop over time, you more kind of embody it, and you guide the process through experience rather than the guiding questions. But I think a lot goes into preparation. And maybe also another tip there, and NLP trained people might be aware of it, is from Robert Dilts, kind of getting into the zone. It's also about preparing yourself and how you can do that and be in the moment and focus on the coachee. And I think also the things that Shola mentioned before about that being active listener and being in the moment and not get distracted, which on Skype or online is maybe easier to do. So it requires an effort, but you can train that on the job and in other Skype calls and conversations, webinars, in your daily work. I think you can gain a lot of experience and just go and do it. It's not rocket science.
That's great advice. Thanks, Esther. Shola, Ezekiel, I don't know if there's any final points that you would like to add to that.
I would like. I'm a huge. I agree with Esther that I like to unpack what coaching is, and for me, at the heart of it, coaching is the ability to ask good questions, to listen deeply, and then to paraphrase and play back what you've heard, and to help people think. And so I think those core skills are it isn't rocket science. At the same time, I am a huge fan of training, because I think that training is important. I've run a lot of coaching skills training over the years. I recently just came back from Ethiopia, and there's something about the time it takes to just spend some time actually unpacking what coaching is and what it isn't, and practicing those core skills. So again, the GROW model is a very useful model. If we look at the online module from the HLA, there's the what, so what, and now what. Now these are techniques. They're techniques that can be used to sharpen those skills and to help people to, be even better what they're doing. But the practice is day to day, because coaching isn't just something that we do in the workplace. It's something that we can do with our friends, with our family. It's something that once we have a good understanding of what the purpose of coaching is, we can use it in our we can use that skill in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that fully agree with what Shola said in the usefulness of some of the skills in daily life. I have tried recently with my kids, trying to think of how to, when they bring something, how to respond with the with the question rather with a solution or with the directive. And sometimes it helps, and I feel like it enriched the relationship without entering into a kind of structured relationship. The other point, it's yeah, I agree. Questioning, it's the core of coaching. So thinking more about how to ask good questions, it's something that it's often counterintuitive, because we are very driven towards finding good answers, finding the solution, having a good advice, instead of thinking about what's the best question about this issue. It's not the normal way that we do business in organizations, so it requires a kind of a shift in the culture. And maybe the last point that Shola mentioned, that it's about paraphrasing. That's not questioning. I mean, it's a kind of a slightly different skill, but a very important one. I mean, when I enter into a conversation and I hear the first about what's the issue and what's the goal, after I paraphrase, it makes a difference in terms of the dynamic, because it clarifies, make the coachee feel that he has been listened. For him, listening in another voice, I mean, what's the problem? It's something that it's a thought-provoking. It's not the same as you saying something, that you listening something in another word. So coaching, it's important, but questioning, it's important, but it's not the only thing. Also paraphrasing and other skills around.
Thank you, Ezekiel and colleagues. Okay, so we've come to the Q&A start, and I'm delighted to say we've got a whole range of questions now that have come through from colleagues who are taking part in this webinar. So thank you all so much. And just to reiterate what Jem said, if we don't get to all of your questions over the course of the next sort of 5 to 10 minutes, not to worry, we will take those offline. We will look at them, we'll try and answer them, and then we'll post them on Kaya and give you a link as well. So thank you for sharing. But actually, just having a quick look through some of them, I wanted to perhaps pick up on a couple of questions that sort of spoke to me here. One of them was from Nancy, who says, what is unique about coaching people in the humanitarian sector? What unique needs do they have? And I'm just wondering, Esther, Ezekiel, Shola, which of you would like to maybe kick off and try and just address that question? So what is unique about coaching people in the humanitarian sector, and what unique needs do you feel that they have from your experiences?
I'm happy to start the questions. I did in my previous role, I worked in partnership with UN OCHA to support them with coaching, and the needs of the needs there were some quite clear needs. So these were quite senior leaders in a position where they had very little time, and so there was something about one, being able to create that space and time, in me very quickly seeing the value that coaching brings. And I think within that also a level of flexibility for the coach, in understanding that there were times where things would change very quickly, time would be shortened, and really being able to help them to understand, the coaches to understand that. I think there's an education piece in the sector, as with generally anyway, which is about a clear understanding from the beginning, because time is of the essence. I think typically what people are wanting to know is that, what is this, and how can it add value to me? How can it help me to deliver more, achieve what it is we're aiming to achieve? So I think the education piece is really important, helping people to understand, appreciating that time is precious, and the real value that coaching or mentoring can bring to that.
Thanks, Shola. Esther, Ezekiel, have you got anything to add before I move on?
Thanks, Gabby. I think Shola mentioned it, and maybe also to reiterate, I don't think it depends on the level of person or staff, whether they're officers or mid-level or senior management. Obviously, it's often kind of middle management or officer level that would be out in the field really doing the hardcore humanitarian work more often. But I think everybody can be coached. Obviously, there's also been questions around kind of, you know, the cultural background and where people work. The thing is to be open-minded and flexible. And I think the flexibility Shola addressed in terms of humanitarian settings, technology, time, it's all limited, and you need to work around that. And in terms of cultural background or where you come from, as a coach, you need to be open-minded. You are not there to frame your opinion. You're there to coach and guide that person, no matter who they are, no matter what gender, no matter what race, no matter which country they're in. I found it very interesting working with people in different countries and places I've never been before. So there was also a learning element for me in there, which I really appreciated doing. But specific to humanitarian, yeah, I think a lot of it applies to humanitarian or development sectors in terms of the principles and what a good coach needs to be.
Yeah, just to add to what has been said, my impression, and it's from a very limited experience of that there is nothing specific or particular about coaching humanitarian people than coaching others. I mean, it's the same toolbox that you have. And you need to be, I mean, all the competences that were mentioned before, you need to be flexible, you need to be open-minded, you need to take into account, you know, the limitations of the context, all the cultural sensitivities on how you handle. But that, I would say, it applies for every field of work. It's not specific about humanitarian. I think that maybe situations, I said that at the beginning, where you are at the peak of a crisis, I don't think that it's an environment that it's conducive to coaching. I mean, if you cannot afford to have at least, you know, in the day work half an hour to reflect, to clear your mind from the running, then I would defer, you know, to other ways of handling problems and leaving the coaching when the situation calms down, at least a little bit, not that it cannot be still, I mean, busy, but you need to be able to afford that moment.
Thank you all. And just coming to another question from Sam van der Ende. Is there a role and a place for humility in being a good coach or mentor? So is there a role and a place for humility in being a good coach or mentor? I see you nodding, Shola, so perhaps I could come to you in the first instance.
Say that there's a role for humility within coaching. I think the perception that people tend to have about coaching, or that was about coaching, is that the coaching is almost the expert. And I think very over time that perception is changing. The coach isn't the expert. The coach is there to support the individual in unlocking their own thinking, in helping them to think. And so I think it's really important from the beginning, to ensure that the relationship is put on a level playing field. So these are two colleagues, two peers who have come together to help the coachee to think through their solutions. I think even in terms of mentoring, there is humility there, because even if the person has more knowledge and more expertise, there is still that sense of, actually there's a joint learning that's taking place, because they might share insights and knowledge about a specific area, but the learning is always two ways. So I think absolutely there's a role for humility.
Thank you, Shola.
Can I come in on that one?
Of course you can.
Yeah, I would say that not only that there is a role for humility, it's a requirement for handling a coaching relationship. You need to defer, you need to the knowledge of the other person. And I think that it was mentioned at the beginning, it's something that redefines a relationship. Even if you are at the, you know, you are the supervisor or the manager of a person, when you enter into a coaching relationship, you became a kind of peer, because you're inquiring and you are asking the other person. And if you want to do effectively coaching, you need to listen. And that's require humility. I mean, that the other person, I mean, has a lot of, knows better than you what is inside that person. I mean, what are the resources that can be recruited, and your job is to extract that one, not to bring yourself into the problem.
Ezekiel, thank you so much. And just one final question then from the Q&As, because I'm conscious of time, but it comes from Maxine, and Maxine was just asking, how can one measure the effectiveness of coaching or mentoring? And also just thinking of that in terms of, you know, how do you know you're having an impact maybe as a coach or a mentor? So what are the signs, what are the things that you notice? And maybe Esther, can I come to you in the first instance on that and then move on to others?
Yeah, sure. In terms of measuring, I haven't thought of it in that much, but I think what maybe we didn't address before is that also there's a role and a place within the sessions to ask for feedback from coachees on your role and your performance as a coach and what worked well, which questions did particularly kind of get them to think or helped them move forward. Maybe there's things that they can indicate they preferred or the likes or dislikes and what you can improve. So I think that's something you can always build into your sessions, that it's not just about giving in the coachee, but also allowing them a moment to reflect on your performance as a coach to really identify what helped them most.
Esther, thank you. And Shola, anything that you'd like to add before we move on?
Yes, I think that definitely in looking at the impact of coaching, Esther's already mentioned the direct feedback from the coach from the coach, between the coach and the coachee. I think as someone who managed a coaching program within a previous role, there was definitely an opportunity for us to gather feedback, to get a better sense of what is the impact that coaching is having within our organization, especially because we had the coaching support from volunteers. It was really important to show that impact. But I think the most important thing that I found is with coaching is that it really is the story that comes from the individual about what has changed. And often when coaching and mentoring is taking place, you pay attention to what's happening. You just know that there was the before and then after. You just know that you felt more confident as a result of having had that conversation, or your the performance is changing. So where you're able to look at that and say, before I wasn't able to do this, and now I have a better understanding, I'm working better, I'm more confident. How do you measure confidence? It's not that easy to measure, but there are things that we can do. So through evaluation forms is a big one. 12 months later, getting a sense from gathering feedback from others about what has been the biggest difference. Those are some of the ways in which you can measure the impact.
Thanks, Shola. And just noticing the time, I think we're going to have to draw to an end this webinar. We only have a few minutes left, and I'd just like to say thank you so much to our panelists, Shola, Esther and Ezekiel, for sharing their experiences. I'd also like to thank you all for sticking with the webinar right through to the end, and also for sharing some of your thoughts, your ideas and your questions. I hope it's been useful. If you haven't already reviewed the 1-hour Introduction to Coaching and Mentoring module that's available on Kaya, that you see up on your screen at the moment, then I might encourage you to do that, particularly those of you who said that you were quite new to coaching and mentoring, but also those of you who might be looking for a refresher. There's also within that course an accompanying toolkit where you'll find even more information about different tools, tips, hints and techniques that you could utilise to really improve your coaching and mentoring practice. So I do encourage you to take a look if you haven't already. So it just leaves me to say that a recorded version of this webinar will be made available on Kaya very soon. So please do go in and have another listen if you joined us late or you had to leave a little early. And also please do share it with other people who may not have been able to be on the call that might find it of interest within your own organisations or networks. Your feedback is really important to us. So we will also be sending around an email asking for your feedback about this webinar. And it will include a link also so you can sign up to our newsletter here at the Humanitarian Leadership Academy, where you can hear about future webinars moving forward. So thank you once again, and I hope you have a good rest of day. Thank you.
Thank you.